On April 29, 2019, a young man disappears without warning.
He was well respected, well liked, and had a wonderful network of friends. So he had all his life to live for.
We weren't looking at an 18-year-old lad who just stayed out too late. There was something more to this.
A rural community rocked by a gruesome murder.
The superintendent rang me and said, "We've found a body."
They were unable to actually identify not just who it was, but whether it was male or female.
He had over 146 different injuries to his body.
In my career, I can only think of a couple of cases where I've seen injuries that come anywhere close to that.
A race against time to catch the killer.
Was he going to do it again? They could have been looking at a serial killer here.
I need to protect the public from this monster.
It seems like a real contradiction to have such a gruesome, awful scene in such a beautiful, picturesque location.
Parbold, it's quite an affluent little village just outside Skelmersdale. Really quiet, nice people, very rural. It is a lovely area.
Population of about 2,500 in a wonderful village setting with its pubs, its shops and its church.
There's a little railway station. It's very quaint. It's what you think of when you think of a village in the northwest of England. There's a really low crime rate in that area. I mean, you get the occasional bit that's flown over from the bigger cities because it's between Manchester and Liverpool, but really it's quiet. People like it for that reason.
You don't expect any issues, any trouble, let alone a murder to happen. It's that one place that you would always see on the television when locals were interviewed and they'd say, well, we'd never expect that to happen around here.
But on April 29, 2019, a young man went missing under unusual circumstances.
The first I heard about this case was when the police put out a missing persons appeal. It seemed a little bit odd because quite often when 18-year-olds don't go home, they don't reach the point of media attention because 18-year-olds, you know, it's not that unusual for them to stay out overnight or whatever. But we heard about this case, this appeal for Alex, and you just get a feeling about things.
The missing person was 18-year-old Alex Davies from the nearby town of Skelmersdale.
Alex worked in Home Bargains and he was doing really well there, and he just recently got promoted. He had a really good social life. He had a lot of close friends, and growing up for Alex wasn't easy. He stood out.
He realised at an early age he was gay, but of course when you're very young, the word that comes to mind is different. I was different in some way, where all it was his sexuality.
Children can be cruel and they can pick out when children are different in some way. Now, for Alex, that was, he liked to do train spotting. He would often go with his friend looking at trains. He liked ABBA, and he was open about the fact he was gay. The sort of things that children can focus in on, and he was picked on for standing out.
Alex, however, had done really well for himself. He'd showed resilience. He'd got through that time in his life. He was openly gay as an adult. He was working hard and doing really well.
Alex was so comfortable in his own skin that he really didn't care if people liked him or not. He was just going to be himself and people could think what they liked.
Very friendly. He would approach people. Often, you know, it was said by some of his friends, he didn't have filters. You know, if he liked somebody, he would go and ask them for it on a date, you know. Carefree, life-loving lad.
Alex had a great group of friends. They described him as lively and happy, and he would see them really often.
Like many boys of his age, Alex was into cars, so he liked to drive around late at night out listening to music. He was even known to pull the odd donut.
He'd pick his friends up, he'd drop them off at home. if they were on the same shift, or, you know, he'd go and pick them up and they'd have some music on, they'd be singing and joking and just having a fun time of it.
He was really there for people, and when you hear people talking about what Alex was like as a person, that really comes through, that he was there for people.
Everybody said that he was one of the nicest guys that you could ever meet.
He was well respected, well liked, and had a wonderful network of friends. So he had all his life to live for.
The last time that Alex met up with his group of friends was on the Friday night. They had drinks, they did what they would usually do, but sadly they didn't know that when they said bye to him that night, for many of them, that would be the final time.
On Monday, 29th of April 2019, Alex's mother, Beverly, returned home from work to find that Alex had not come home.
The kind of relationship that Alex had with his mum, they were really close, and it would have been really unusual for him not to be in contact with her. When she came home that night, 9 o'clock, and she hadn't heard from him all day, she started to worry. She had those mother instincts that it's not quite right because this is out of the normal. I would have heard from him by now.
There were no secrets, so she would know where he'd be. A lot of relationships like that, you can set your watch. You know what's going to happen, where people are going to be. So she was very surprised that he wasn't there and he didn't turn up at home when she was at home. And when you know somebody, whatever age they are, you know that's out of character. So straight away, his mother was concerned, worried, and a bit bamboozled about what has happened to Alex.
Beverly grew even more concerned as it drew closer to midnight on Monday and there was still no sign of Alex.
Alex's mum was starting to get really worried now, and as you would expect, she started to phone around his friends.
Obviously hoping that there was a really simple explanation that perhaps he got caught up in things, his phone had no battery. But as she was ringing through, it soon became clear that none of his friends had seen him since the Friday.
Then one particular friend, Leon, when he said he hadn't heard from Alex, that really started to worry her because that was unusual.
Leon had seen him on the Sunday at work, but he'd not seen him at all since then, and for both of them not to have seen him, something was really wrong.
The following morning, when Alex still wasn't home, she was more worried than ever, and that was when she decided to phone the police.
Unfortunately, perhaps as might be expected, it wasn't treated as high risk. Alex was an adult. It was suggested that give it some time, see what happens.
Then it was a case of, well, he'll come back. He may have just been staying at a friend's house. So police don't sort of take it lightly, but they don't take it seriously in a sense. So therefore, as a parent, you feel that you've been let down, that no report's been taken, they're not going to do anything.
I think it's a mother's instinct. You know your children, you know your patterns, you know what to expect. And when something's not right, it's just a feeling and it's not something you can describe. It's powerful.
Alex's friends and family did not want to waste any time, so they began their own appeals for help.
His friends took to social media to try and raise awareness that Alex is missing, asking for information that anybody had of him. Had they seen him? Do they know where he is? And that included Home Bargains, where he worked. They used their own Facebook page to put out an appeal for information as to where Alex might be.
Alex had previously been confronted by a group on his way to work, so one of his friends was worried that perhaps he'd been picked on, perhaps he'd been attacked. They must have been thinking the worst.
Beverly downloaded the CCTV footage from her front door camera and made an interesting discovery in the recordings from Monday, 29th April.
Alex got a taxi from outside their house, and on the CCTV she could make out the registration number that she could trace back to the cab firm.
So the next thing you'd automatically do as anybody, let alone a parent, is to ring that firm and say, look, I'm worried about my son. Can you please tell me where that taxi actually took my son?
It turns out that he was dropped off at the station in Parbold, which is about 10 miles away from where he lives.
There were no indications that Alex was alive, moving around, doing everyday things. And this would have started to raise the concerns of the police and raise the risk against him.
Police began their search for Alex by scouring CCTV footage in Parbold, where he had taken the taxi to on the day he went missing.
There was CCTV in and around Parbold train station, which showed Alex turning up in the taxi, getting out, carrying a rucksack, and he went into a shop and he bought a can of pop and bar of chocolate. They were able to track Alex's route using different CCTV cameras that were available, but only to a certain point. Because this was now a rural area, the camera footage stopped, the coverage stopped. So some distance away from Parbold Station, they knew that Alex was walking towards a more rural area.
From that point on, the trail went cold. There seemed to be no more evidence of Alex in the area. The police and family members had reached a dead end in their search for Alex.
And as the days went on, it became more and more concerning, really, that, you know, we weren't looking at an 18-year-old lad who'd just stayed out too late and not gone home when he was expected. There was something more to this.
But everything changed when the inevitable call came on the evening of May 1st.
I'd finished work, gone home, doing my thing at home, just sat down watching the telly, and the superintendent rang me and said, "Are you aware there's a job at Parbold?" And I said, "I'm not. What is it?" And he said, "We've found a body."
It's hard to understand that such a brutal thing could happen here.
The rural community of Parbold was about to be shocked by what had happened in their peaceful village. April 29th, 2019. 18-year-old Alex Davies from Skelmersdale, Lancashire, has disappeared, raising concerns among his family and friends. He was last sighted on CCTV in the village of Parbold before vanishing without a trace. But a grim discovery is made on May 1st. A body has been found in some nearby woods.
I took responsibility for the investigation on the Thursday morning. Alex was found on the Wednesday evening. He was found by a gamekeeper who'd gone to check the traps.
He spotted an arm underneath a pile of conifers.
It was quite clear that there'd been a lot of violence.
The body has been so badly mutilated, they were unable to actually identify not just who it was, but whether it was male or female.
So at that point, I said to my deputy, D.I. Muller, "Can you open your computer and see what missing from homes we've got locally?" He said, "They've got a missing from home from Skelmersdale," and he brought up a picture of Alex. I said, "Let's have a look at him." And I was looking at a picture of Alex, and I'm looking at the body in front of me, and I'm thinking, they don't look the same.
For the family, of course, it's terrible that a body's been found, but there was still that grain of hope that maybe it wasn't Alex, that maybe Alex was still out there somewhere.
His mother must have just been so distressed. On the one hand, she's hoping it's not Alex, but on the other hand, she wants to know what's happened to Alex.
Beverly's worst nightmare becomes a reality when the identification of the body is confirmed.
We had a search team, and suddenly I heard a cry of "find" from one of the search officers, and they all stopped. It was almost military in precision, really. They just stopped searching, and the Pulsar then took over, and they found what you would call the contents of a wallet, so library card, train card, other cards, bank cards, etc., etc. And they were in the name of Alex Davies. Alex had a little tiny birthmark on his cheek, really just like a little beauty spot, if you will. And in his photograph, he was wearing a silver chain. So I examined the body in front of me, and I thought I could just see a little beauty spot, and the body did have a silver chain on. So at that point, I made the call. I want someone to go around to his mum, who's reported him missing. Tell her, I think we've found him.
It must have been terrible for his mum to know, firstly, that her son had died, that he'd been murdered, and that he was in such a state that they needed to identify him through jewellery. And that moment when they showed her that jewellery, I can't imagine the feeling that must have been in her stomach and in her heart.
It's not just losing a son, it's losing a son in such horrific circumstances.
Alex had multiple stab wounds.
As well as the stab wounds, Alex had injuries to his face, he had a broken nose. It looked like he'd been badly beaten as well as being stabbed.
When I started to look at Alex, I noticed that he had mud up his nostrils and in his mouth. It looked like he'd been dragged face down, and that was awful. And I saw this flat area of land. I started to sort of just assess it as a crime scene. Is that relevant? Very quickly established the grass was flat, and there were lots of bluebells. It was May. Lots of bluebells. They'll always stick in my mind, and a lot of them were flattened, which said to me a lot of activity has happened in that area. So is that where something's happened, and is that where it started, and this where Alex was? Is this where it's ended? So I started to hypothesise what might have happened.
The post-mortem revealed the horrific nature of Alex's death.
He was stabbed 128 times. He had over 146 different injuries to his body.
We know that Alex was still alive when the stab wounds were being inflicted on him because the post-mortem found his cause of death to be asphyxiation, so he'd felt those injuries.
In my career, I can only think of a couple of cases where I've seen injuries that have come anywhere close to that. This is indicating a horrific, sustained, violent attack on him. And it appeared as if the body had been dragged down a slope, placed next to a tree, and had foliage put over it in an almost crude attempt to hide the body.
It's hard to fathom the level of force and also the level of rage that must have been involved in an attack like that. What was going through this killer's mind to be so angry and to be so vicious and so violent?
That kind of crime scene with over 100 stab wounds suggests to me a perpetrator who was acting on emotion, loss of emotional control. That's not to say they didn't have control over their decision-making and their actions, but it's someone who couldn't cope with their emotions. Somebody kept going until they were either no longer feeling those emotions in the moment, or they simply tired themselves out.
We had what we call a welfare van. It had equipment so we could make a cup of tea or a coffee. So the CSI said, we're going to go to the welfare van. So they all went off to do their thing, and then I looked at Alex and I thought, I can't leave this young man. His mum wouldn't want me to leave him like this, all on his own. And I don't really know what the catalyst for that was, but I just couldn't leave him. So I just stood at the side of him, quietly. But during that time, I was thinking, look at the injuries that this young man's suffered. And I was trying to imagine who would have done it. Who would have been responsible? What kind of person could have been responsible for that kind of horrific attack?
It seems like a real contradiction to have such a gruesome, awful scene, such a horrible crime in such a beautiful, picturesque location. It's night and day. When Alex's body was found, there was an outpouring of love for him, actually. There was a lot of tributes laid at the scene. You know, it was clear that he was a really loved guy. He had a lot of friends and a lot of people who were absolutely devastated that this kind, friendly young man had been killed in such an awful way.
The media were quite keen to understand what was happening, but equally for me as an SIO, I wanted to offer as much reassurance to the public of Parboulder and the wider communities that we were doing everything that we could to sort of understand what had happened and catch the person responsible for killing Alex. If I'm honest, I wanted to get him in the cells as quickly as, so he couldn't do anything else to any other people. I had this thing about, I need to protect the public from this monster.
Now the hunt is on for Alex's killer.
Despite the difficulties of a rural crime scene, severe weather, wind, rain, not to mention animals being present around the crime scene too, the police found a crucial piece of evidence.
In the ground was a small knife that had been pushed into the dirt, just with the handle sticking up.
And that became really important because when we had that forensically examined, it had Alex's blood on it. And then we showed the pathologist the knife, and she could then compare that to the injuries, and it all fell into place. So it was a really, really good find.
There's a saying in murder investigation, to understand how a person died, you have to understand how they lived. And that's because, in general, there's some link between someone or something in the victim's life that would indicate why harm has come to them. And that's because most times there's a link between a killer and a victim. So you need to start to build up a picture of the victim's life. And that could be by talking to friends, looking at their social media posts. And importantly now is looking at people's phones. We can build up such a huge picture of someone's life now from their phones. So this is a task that the police were now having to do for Alex, to build up a picture of those hours and days leading up to his murder as to who he was in contact with.
The police began to look into Alex's call logs. Had he contacted anybody that was out of the ordinary? And they did see something different. They saw a number that had contacted him on the day of his murder that had never contacted him before. Police managed to find out that the number that had called Alex had also called a landline. So they called the landline and asked the people there whose phone it was.
And this led them straight to Brian Heelis.
Investigators waste no time and go to the home address of Brian Heelis.
I've got someone who's just brutalised an 18-year-old boy and was still at large. And my sense of duty to protect the public was immense.
But the person they discovered is not who they expected.
And he was just a young fella, absolutely unremarkable in every way, shape and form. Physically, he had no presence. You know, you could almost describe him as grey. You would never notice him in a quiet street, never mind a busy one. There's just nothing about him.
Police need to establish any previous criminal history.
Most people who commit murder have some kind of history with the police. Now, it might not necessarily be violent crime, but they'll be known in some way. He had no criminal history. He wasn't known to the police, so he hadn't been arrested before, hadn't come to notice in any way. So if it was Brian Heelis that had murdered Alex in this brutal way, this is going to be really quite unusual.
The police then understandably searched Heelis's house. Importantly, they found crucial evidence there.
In the CCTV footage of Alex, as he was walking away from that train station, he had a rucksack. And the contents of that rucksack were now found in Heelis's home.
Investigators now need to uncover the sequence of events that led to Alex's death. On 29th April 2019, 18-year-old Alex Davies from Skelmersdale disappeared without a trace in a rural part of Lancashire. His mutilated body was discovered in a wooded area of Parbold Hill a few days later. Investigators have been led to the home of 18-year-old Brian Heelis, who they learned had called Alex on the day he went missing.
When the police were searching Heelis's home, they'll be looking for any clues, any evidence that can link him to either the crime scene or to Alex himself. And that's what they found in his home. They found earphones, mobile phone, and wallet belonging to Alex.
When they found Alex's headphones at Heelis's house, they'd also got the serial number of that exact pair of headphones because Alex had kept a box for them. So they were able to match the serial number on the box to the actual pair of headphones that they found at Heelis's house. You couldn't say that he had a pair that were the same. These were the exact headphones.
We looked at the telephone and we established that that was his granddad's. His granddad had passed. So Alex had said to his uncle, "Can I have granddad's phone that I can keep as a spare in case my battery dies?" So all of a sudden, Brian Heelis has got Alex's spare phone, Alex's headphones, and Alex's wallet. Not only had he got his wallet, he'd taken everything out of Alex's and thrown it at the scene, and he'd put his own ID cards and his own money in it. He was actually using it. We found the knife block with a missing knife. We found a bike, and we found clothing, which was all seized. So the evidence is fairly overwhelming.
So if there was any doubt, as to whether or not Helis was the person that they were looking for, that doubt had gone now. There was no doubt whatsoever in the officer's mind, we have our man.
And now we start the process of gathering evidence from him. So we did the custody procedures, we did the hand swabs, all that kind of thing, and then the interview was going to be key.
Brian Helis was taken into custody and he was asked a lot of questions about Alex's disappearance and about the murder.
He's been given the same old advice from a solicitor who turns up to represent him. Don't say anything, make the police prove it. First question gets asked, and he's been advised to say no comment. What does he say? No.
Are you responsible for the murder of Alex Davies?
No. That tells me he wanted to talk.
Just step in. Do you recall the advice I gave you in the interview?
Yes.
We'll start again. Are you responsible for the murder of Alex Davies?
No comment.
That's Alex. Have a look at that picture. Do you know Alex?
No comment.
Have you ever seen that person before?
No comment.
How do you know him?
No comment.
With no cooperation from Helis, investigators need to work hard to build a case against him.
It might be easy to think that once somebody's been arrested and there's some evidence available, that it's really easy for the police to prove that they committed the offence. But that's far from the case. They have to prove this beyond reasonable doubt. So in the background, there will have been loads of work going on to hone out what the actual evidence was, to make things clear and to see if there was anything else they needed to support a prosecution.
So then they start to look at CCTV in and around the areas Alex had been, and importantly, the route between Helis's home and the crime scene. And what this showed is that he, in actual fact, on the day that Alex went missing, had cycled from Chorley to Parbold. And that footage showed him going there and coming back.
The first time that they see Brian Helis in the area, he's not got anything with him, he's just riding a bike. Later on that day, they see him again riding the bike, but this time he's got a backpack on.
And that rucksack matched the one seen being carried by Alex on the CCTV they had of him. So again, it's more evidence linking Helis not only to Alex, but linking him to his murder.
But how had these two young men encountered each other? And how had Alex ended up murdered on Parbold Hill?
An important element in any murder investigation is the building up of a timeline by laying out known facts and when they happened. And that's what they did in this case. And it started to build a picture that indicated what had happened in the lead up to Alex's murder. What they were able to identify is that Helis and Alex had been communicating on a dating app. And those communications have moved from the dating app to WhatsApp. And they started to talk to each other.
The majority of this was literally the build up to the day that we know that Alex was murdered. So you've got that initial of how are you, do you fancy meeting up, what should we do, etc. Then a few interests. We know that Alex actually was very, very much into his ABBA music, and of course even the Bee Gees. He actually says in one of the messages, do you know who the Bee Gees are? Brian Helis has no idea what he's talking about. So you've got some normal conversations, but a lot of it is flirtatious.
What became clear is that Helis was pushing for a meet, pushing to meet Alex, and he was being what I would describe as manipulative. He was talking himself as, I haven't come out yet as gay, so people don't know. Meaning that when we meet, it needs to be somewhere secluded, somewhere we're not going to get seen. Now we know, looking back, why that was. But for Alex himself, he probably wanted to see the best in the person he was speaking to.
It's not unusual for young people to try and keep their love lives from their parents, regardless of sexuality, but particularly in a situation that perhaps, you know, the mum and dad maybe aren't as open-minded, so it would be a believable story.
Alex's character is so trusting. You know, he's got this wonderful network of friends. He works so much for charity. He believes in people, and I think that was picked up straight away. There's that question of, he just asked, what phone have you got? And of course, he's got a Samsung 9. And of course, what does Helis have? A Samsung 3. Automatically, you can think to yourself, oh, this could be robbery. He wants the better phone. To me, what that's doing is Helis trying to go for the sympathy. Oh, I've only got a Samsung 3, and then because you've got this wonderful, caring individual in Alex saying, oh, I can look after you there, and I've got a Samsung 9, I can help you out. You're a bit younger than me, so I can be like the older brother, but also in the relationship, I can make sure that I can look after you. So I think you've already seen that Alex even felt that Helis was slightly vulnerable, but he wasn't. He was being duped. He was being lured into this awful trap.
He said, do you think it'd be worth upgrading because mine's so slow? That was really important, that, because you think, what are you talking about, Jeff? But that's so, you know, the S with a load of O's. I thought that's unusual. Anyway, when we then do the research on Brian Helis's computer, we see him, after he's had that conversation with Alex, he's researching on eBay how much you can sell Galaxy S9 for, and how to reset a Samsung Galaxy S9, how to avoid being tracked.
Also in the phone messages were the plans of when the two young men would meet. It was scheduled for April 29th, the day that Alex went missing.
And now you start to see the build-up and the arrangements for meeting. Who is in control of this? They've both decided that there will be a meet, but of course what's very interesting here is that you've got Brian Helis, who's actually turned around and said, I've got a location. So he's now in control of the meet. He knows where it's going to be, what time it's going to be. I'm in control.
Alex must have been excited, looking forward to a nice day out, going on a date, going to meet this new guy who seemed fun and flirty.
It was Helis that was pushing for this meet. Then he was pushing for it in a secluded area. He took a knife with him. These were indications that this, in actual fact, wasn't a spontaneous event. This was a planned and premeditated murder.
Alex must have been terrified. He'd set out that morning, looking forward to a nice day out, and when it turned so badly and so violent, he must have been terrified. It was exactly what he wasn't expecting that day.
And then obviously they met in the wood. I couldn't speculate. What I do know, there was a violent episode and Brian Helis battered and then stabbed Alex to death.
When we found Alex, he has multiple injuries. Are you responsible for causing those injuries?
No comment.
Are you responsible for murdering Alex Davies?
No comment.
Brian Helis's phone held some other disturbing information in the days after Alex had been murdered.
Really worryingly, what they also find is that after Alex has been killed, Helis is back on the dating apps. He was speaking to multiple other young men. He was trying to arrange meetups. Was he going to do it again? There's every chance that they could have been looking at a serial killer here.
On May 3rd, 2019, police arrest 18-year-old Brian Helis for the brutal murder of Alex Davies in a secluded area of Parbold Hill. Alex had been stabbed 128 times by Helis, whom he met on a dating site. Police discovered the details of how Helis lured Alex to the woods in Parbold that day, and now they have incriminating evidence on Helis's phone to suggest that he was planning to kill again.
He killed Alex on the Tuesday afternoon, and then on the Wednesday and Thursday, he'd made contact with a man in Skelmersdale about a sexual encounter. Brian Helis had sort of indicated that he could stay over at this address, and the other person said, not likely, you know, we'll do what we need to do and then you're away, mate. So that didn't seem to fit what Helis wanted. But then he made contact with another guy in the Bolton area, so the other side of Chorley. And really unusual, because he asked this guy what kind of phone he had. And he said, oh, I've got a Huawei P Lite. And he said, I've got a rubbish, whatever it is. Is it worth upgrading? Because mine is so slow. And they arranged to meet, and he said, as he said with Alex, it will be the first time I've kissed anybody, so I'm a bit shy. Is there somewhere discreet we can go? And the other person had said, well, there's a wooded area near mine, we can go there. And then we arrested him on the Friday night. He was going to meet him the following day.
We'll never know whether that was for the same purpose. But it's not exactly a leap, is it, to go from, I've just killed one person in this route, and now I'm trying to meet another. There's a very good chance that they've prevented him carrying out a second murder.
There were other signs that Helis may not have stopped after the murder of Alex.
He'd been doing searches on army spades, as it were. They're the fold-up spades, so you can carry them in a rucksack. Why would you be doing that when we know those actual items for the army are used to actually dig very quickly little troughs or little holes in the ground? So is this all this learning curve for this sociopath, psychopath, who is now actually living his dream, which is gets the anger and he wants to kill? And now he's planning the future. Well, I've got to dispose of the body a lot better. So perhaps it's actually not worked that out. If I do this, what do I do with the body? And that's hit him when it's happened. He's dragged it, tried to cover it up. It didn't work. And now already he's planning for the next one.
So when we look at the circumstances of what happened after Alex's murder, can any sort of inference be drawn from the fact that Helis had taken Alex's property and still had it with him in his bedroom? Well, it's difficult, in all honesty, to 100% say one way or the other. But what he would have been able to do, he had the opportunity to do, is to throw away that property, to dump it on his route home, put it in a bin, throw it in a bush. He didn't do that, he took it home. Why would he do that? Well, one of two reasons, really. One, it's a shiny object I want to keep. It's a phone, it's got value. Or, and more sinister, it's some kind of trophy, a reminder of what he's done. And if we're talking about an emotional attack where someone's carried it out because of that, what these killers will often do is keep almost like a memento from their crime to remind them of the attack and almost sort of to draw out that emotion again at some later time.
They couldn't rule out the fact that they might be looking at somebody with a real vengeance, and having killed one person, you could do it again.
The trial for the murder of Alex Davies is held at Preston Crown Court in March 2020.
There was quite a lot of press there for the trial. It was an intriguing case. At that point, all that we knew was that Alex had disappeared. His body had been found on Parbold Hill, and the boy had been arrested. At that stage, we didn't know the background about the dating app. We didn't know the extent of Alex's injuries. So when the prosecution opened the case, it was really quite a shock to learn what had happened that day. When Brian Helis walked into the dock, he just looked like you might see him outside the local sixth form college. He was very emotionless. His face barely moved. There was no sign of any sort of remorse or anything. He was an odd character in that regard. By the time the prosecution's finished opening the case, it seems fairly cut and dried. They had so much evidence: the headphones, the backpack, all the phone evidence, all the CCTV evidence. it was difficult to think what Heelis could possibly say to try and get out of this one.
Murder investigations teams put a huge amount of effort into gathering the evidence against any killer. And you can go to court and you can feel like we've done everything. We've got all the evidence we have. I'm in absolutely no doubt that a person standing trial has committed this crime. But that does not mean that you go to court confident that the verdict's going to be one of guilty, because it has to go through a jury. And you can never take for granted the decision a jury are going to make. So as confident as you are, you can never go into a trial expecting to get a guilty verdict.
Heelis's defence was diminished responsibility. There was reports from psychiatrists that backed that up, actually. He had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and his defence was that he'd committed this offence while suffering with that condition. Heelis said that he thought that people were after him and that was why he was carrying a knife that day. And he said that while he was on his way to meet Alex, he thought that there was people trying to knock him off his bike in their cars. And yeah, he was painting a picture of real paranoia.
What happens when a defendant looks to use a defence of diminished responsibility is that they will be seen by their own psychiatrist, appointed by their own legal team. And they will assess them as to whether or not that defence, partial defence of diminished responsibility, is open to them. And that's what happened in this case. And this psychiatrist said, yes, in my opinion, Heelis has a defence of diminished responsibility because he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. But then what would happen is the prosecution would appoint their own psychiatrist to carry out the same assessment. If they agree with the previous assessment, yes, the defence is open to them. The likelihood is that the Crown Prosecution Service will accept that. If they disagree, then they will go to trial. And it wouldn't be on the facts of whether or not the incident took place. It would be what was in the mind of the defendant, what was in the mind of Heelis at the time it was being committed.
It seems that it was agreed that paranoid schizophrenia was a relevant diagnosis for Heelis, but there's still the question, did it cause the murder? Does it result in diminished responsibility?
You've got the days beforehand of the chat. You've got the whole thing that's been planned to meet an individual. So he knows he's going to meet an individual and he takes a knife with him and then immediately goes into the anger and attacks Alex. This is your classic premeditation. The fact that he's planned everything to meet Alex in a secluded spot, even controls the location and kills Alex. So it's not spontaneous, where they've had a relationship, something's broken down and he's picked up a weapon and used it, and then what do I do? He's actually, and diminished responsibilities would mean he's got no idea what he's doing. Well, just look at the chat logs, look at the control he's doing. So without a doubt, he has thought out the whole thing here.
After the trial had concluded and the judge had made his comments, sent the jury out, we were waiting.
Despite having complex issues like a defence of diminished responsibility to navigate, the jury took only an hour to decide. They knew what the outcome was going to be, and he was found guilty of murder.
In the UK, there's only one sentence for murder, and that is one of life imprisonment. But in the UK, life doesn't always and rarely means life. A judge will set a minimum tariff, meaning the defendant will have to serve this amount of prison time before they can apply for parole. In this instance, the judge passed a sentence of a minimum of 24 years, meaning it would be that long before Heelis could apply for parole.
But Brian Heelis is yet to see the inside of a prison.
Because of his mental health conditions, he has never actually gone into a prison. He's detained now at a psychiatric unit, a secure psychiatric unit on the outskirts of Preston. I think for Alex's family, it's got to be hard to know that the young man that killed Alex has never been inside a prison cell. They feel that there's a lack of justice there, that for everything that he did, he's never really paid the price.
I'm in no doubt Heelis is, and probably always will be, a dangerous individual. To go from no offending history to an attack of this ferocity really suggests someone, and I don't use this word lightly, is evil. 24 years would mean he'll be roughly in his early 40s before he could be released. So still a relatively young person, young enough to start his own family, to start a life, something that Alex will never have.
Loads of people use dating websites perfectly safely, but the difficulty with that is we can be lulled into a false sense of security. We need to remember that we're messaging someone who you've no idea in reality who they are, what they like. They might be telling you one thing, but the truth is something else completely.
Bev, Alex's mother, said, well, yes, she was aware that her son was using them, even to the extent they had the conversation that his mother was aware of some horrendous cases involving some online sexual predators who had gone on to murder. Alex said, that's okay, that will never happen to me.
Online dating's the world that we live in now, isn't it? That's how people meet. You know, I think certainly a high number of relationships start online these days. I think there's always advice out there. If you're going to meet somebody, meet them in public, tell a friend where you're going, all of those kind of things. Because really, until you've met, you can never really be sure that somebody is who they say they are.